Nikaya, three refuges. Udam Sarnam Gacchami. Udam Sarnam Gacchami. Dhammam Sarnam Gacchami. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. I take refuge in Sangha. The 500. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is there in me and everyone I love are of the nature. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My deeds are my closest to the end. I am the beneficiary of my deeds. My deeds are the ground on which I stand. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are the nature of change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My needs are my closest companions. I am the beneficiary of my deeds. My deeds are the ground on which I stand. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I am the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature of change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My needs are my closest companions. I am the beneficiary of my needs. My deeds are the ground on which I stand. This precious human life, rarely encountered, is easily lost. Now that I have life and opportunity, may I practice the Dharma wholeheartedly. Mahayana refuge. In my heart, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. May I liberate suffering beings and bring joy. That I may act in my heart, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. May I liberate suffering beings and bring them to great joy. May the compassionate spirit of love grow within me, that I may actualize a great way. In my heart, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. May I liberate suffering beings and bring them to great joy. May the compassionate spirit of love grow within me, that I may actualize the great way. Invocation of the lineage. I give thanks for the guidance of my teachers, for the lineage of teachers before them. I give thanks and praise for their devoted practice, generosity, moral discipline, patience, joy, concentration, wisdom, skillful means, unshakable vow, spiritual powers, and awakened awareness for my benefit. May their years be lengthened, and may their vows be completely realized, and may I cultivate these perfections with their guidance. 7 practices of the Bodhisattva. I bow down in body, speech, and mind. I offer the best I have to give, both freely and matter, to fill the space between us. I regret and purify all transgressions. I rejoice in all virtues. I request you to remain until total enlightenment. I request wise and compassionate guidance. I dedicate my merit to the state of all beings. Generating love and compassion. May all sentient beings be free from clinging and hatred. Being close to some and distant from others, how wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will free them from clinging and hatred. Blessed be to accomplish this. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will bring them happiness and the causes of happiness. Blessed be to accomplish this. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. Blessed be to accomplish this. May all sentient beings know the joy that has never known suffering. May they be free from clinging, hatred, jealousy, mindfulness, doubt, pride, wrong view, ignorance, and dualistic thoughts. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. I will bring them to this state. Blessed be to accomplish this. Please stand for the arts found on page 4 of your liturgy. Great Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. Practicing the Prajna Paramita clearly so that all 5 transforming all suffering and distress, Shari Bhuta Infinite realms of light and dark, convey the Buddha mind, all that is, and we ourselves come forth in perfect harmony. We offer this sincere and devoted practice for the many beings of this world. Thanks to the strength and sound practice of the great Heartless Sangha and its teachers. May our virtuous actions be clear from all interferences, and may our vows be fully realized. We especially dedicate these all those suffering cruelty and injustice and war to Molly, Soko, Ethan, Hazel, JJ, Jasmine, Sharon, Art, Suke, Roger, to Mike, Dorothy, Keeson, Kayla, Allison, Lynn, and Cindy at the time of their death, and to those names we hold in the silence of our hearts, as well as those names we now voice aloud. live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma, and may we realize the Buddha way together. Wisdom beyond wisdom, Dharma School, all students, please proceed to class. Everyone else, please prepare for Zazen. sound of the clappers. Please goes from the center out. Please turn to your right. Second and full, turn to your left. We will now recite the Song of Covenant, found on page 8 of your liturgy book. We, the Daishin Kokuji Sangha, with respect for the worth and dignity of each person, with wonder and wisdom and compassion we seek to cultivate our lives, and with deep gratitude for the teachers of this lineage and our connection to one another, covenant to support each other by upholding the precepts of doing no harm, practicing good, and actualizing good for others. Please be seated. I'll sit comfortably so you can face the teacher. And in a moment, we'll recite the Gatha on opening the sutra, also found on page 8.
Sean, bring the table over.
Gatha on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear, breathe, may realize the Tata Kata's true meaning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Kind of an interesting day with the marathon happening. We had two different cohorts engaged in Dharma practice and study from 8:30 to 10:30 this morning. So in the Zendo here, we had a group of folks studying the Lam Rim teachings. And then in the back, we had a bunch of folks in their Jakai formation training. And I think at a certain moment, there was also beginning instruction happening at the same time. And so all this while the marathon makes it impossible to get here. So it's kind of funny. We had a number of folks trying to find their way in here with the road closures, and they abandoned hope and went home and zoomed in. And for all the trouble that the pandemic caused so many of us, a few good things seems to have come out of it. There is actually a healthy way to use technology to overcome what otherwise would be a real obstacle. So, may we all learn as a species to use technology wisely instead of being used by it. So we're going to continue on with the Lankavatara Sutra, and I'm aware of two very contradictory things in this moment. One, this is a very complicated, thick, obtuse, difficult teaching, and there's a lot of newer folks here. Oh, gosh. So a quick preliminary, for those to whom this whole thing is new, I encourage you to not let yourself get stuck in too much analytical detail, or don't self-confound with Buddhist problems. There's enough, going around without importing them. Rather, just let the teaching kind of wash over you, and let us try to see through to the main point, which the sutra really is trying to bring to our attention, which, after all, actually isn't that complicated. It really isn't, and I hope that's at least believable by the end of this talk for a moment. So we're in the chapter of the Lankavatara Sutra, which is called the mind system, wherein the Buddha is responding to Mahamati, who is asking about the nature of suffering and how to relieve suffering. And in the process of this, the Buddha, the sutra brings various elements to the attention of the questioner. And the tradition is such that this sutra is really at the heart of Chan and Zen practice and training. And as we've spent some time looking at this together, that becomes increasingly apparent. Things that people who have been here for some time will have heard in another context. Suddenly we can see that their root, one of them anyway, is very much in this sutra. And that'll be the case today as well. Now, in the prior little chunk, the Buddha was responding and said this: if and when the discriminating mind can be gotten rid of, the whole mind system will cease to function, and universal mind alone will remain. Getting rid of the discriminating mind removes the cause of all error. Then Mahamati says, tell us then, Great One, what do you mean by cessation of the mind system? What's that all about? Sounds a little scary, sounds a little intriguing. What do you mean when you say this? And the Buddha replied, the 5 sense functions and their discrimination and thinking function have their rising and complete endings from moment to moment. They are born with discrimination as cause, with form and appearance, and objectivity closely linked together as condition. The will to live is the mother, ignorance the father. By setting up names and forms, greed and desire is multiplied, and thus the mind goes on mutually conditioning and being conditioned. By becoming attached to names and forms, not realizing that they have no more basis than the activities of the mind itself, error arises. False imagination as to pleasure and pain arise, and the way to freedom and awakening is blocked. The lower system of the sense minds and the discriminating mind do not really suffer the pleasure and pain. They only imagine that they do. This suffering of pleasure and pain are the deceptive reactions of mortal mind, and it grasps an imaginary, unobjective world. So let's try to unpack that much of it to start. As a framing concept, when the Buddha here is describing mind, don't think of like your brain. There's a description of what he calls an eightfold mind system. We heard in our chant today: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, meaning brain. Then there's a sense of egoic self, and then there's a storehouse consciousness. And these are all sort of kind of a stack. And take it as a picture of a way of experiencing. If you really pay attention to your inner experience, where we get hooked and where the suffering and the trouble really is happening, you sense something like this. And thus the Buddha says, let's pay attention to this map and use it. So the 5 sense functions and their discrimination and thinking function have their rising and complete endings from moment to moment. This is a very important point. It's actually simpler than it sounds. Rather than there being a fixed, permanent mind, which is constantly encountering things, what the sutra is saying very clearly is that that entire experience rises and dissipates instantaneously. There is no fixed you in the center of this, but rather in nanosecond by nanosecond, microsecond by microsecond speed, faster than you can be aware of it, there's an encounter of an organ of perception, an object of perception, and heretofore in the sutra, the Buddha has been calling it a sense mind. So for example, I see an object, let us say, with the organ of the eye, the object of perception, and the sutra has been saying there's an eye sense mind. And these 3 together make experience. Now, in this chunk, what the Buddha is saying is that sort of triad of object of perception, organ of perception, and consciousness related to this is not a fixed thing. That whole thing itself is constantly coming into being and disappearing and coming into being and disappearing. We have the sense of continuity because of karma and karmic habit energy. There is a cause and effect that's kind of cascades through. So a modern analogy is, back when films used to actually be film, right? You have a series of still images that are run past what used to be a light bulb, and they move by so fast that the eye perceives something to be happening that actually is not happening. Rather than a horse running around, you've got a series of still images, but they happen so fast that we take it to be movement. There's a reason why that works so well for us. There's a reason why that like we just take it, there's Gandalf, you shall not pass, and it's happening, and it's not actually happening. Not only is it an actor in a film, but the very thing that you're seeing is not occurring the way that it seems, right? I mean, really, it's pixels, it's flashing lights. So that technology is actually an expression of the minds that made it. That's us. That's the reason why that works, is because that's how we work, you see. And the Buddha is saying this thousands of years ago. So not a fixed thing. Now, further, he continues to say that these mind moments, these sense minds moments, these sense functions and their discrimination and thinking function, they are born with discrimination as cause. And discrimination here means picking and choosing, feeling desire for or repulsion by. It's an instantaneous experience, but that attraction or disgust or neutrality, right, is cause, and the form and appearance and objectivity are closely linked as the condition. Now, those who've been training for a while might recognize these words, causes and conditions. When we say the causes and conditions are not yet ripe, or the causes and conditions are ripe, it's not just kind of a random phrase. It's coming from deep wisdom within the tradition as filtered through translation and culture. Many cultures, many languages. But there's something to this. Causes, conditions, a not fixed self, and yet experiences arising. The will to live as mother, ignorance as father. The sort of drive to be, life wills to life, life like lifing itself, that drive that you never consciously consented to, right? As I'm fond of saying now, you didn't get an opportunity to sign a waiver. There's no consent form here. Just suddenly the force of life expressing as you, sucker. And ignorance here means not seeing into the true nature of things. So actually taking the movie to be factually happening in front of you, as opposed to realizing you're watching a show. It's a whole different thing if you know you're watching a show. By setting up names and forms, greed is multiplied. Addiction, obsession, rumination, that stupid thought you can't seem to exercise from your own mind stream, right? Why is it? How does that happen? Like, how is that really happening? And what's expressed here is that if you settle down enough in your meditation and you have correct way of practicing and you're connected with guidance, you will be able to actually see the fact that this is a light show. And you'll be able to see how this thing is happening. And then it's a very different world that you live in. But when you don't realize it's a light show, and particularly if it's a horror show, and you can't shut the thing off, it's scary, right? It hurts. And that hurting, that suffering is as real as things get. So the Buddha says, pay attention. Not just so that you can like have a little bit of a happier moment, but really, really pull the hood open and look in the engine. How is this happening? Okay. By setting up names and forms, greed is multiplied, and thus the mind goes on mutually conditioning and being conditioned. This is eye, ear, nose, tongue, senses of the body, and thinking itself. It's like each of these are independent planets in the solar system that you take to be a fixed thing. And each of them has their own kind of wheel that spins and spins and spins. And it's mutually conditioning and conditioned. It's a self-perpetuating trap. Consider, evolution does not care about you being happy. Evolution doesn't care about you being happy. The evolution of you as a physical organism is not the result of evolution being an entity saying, I should create conditions for happiness. That's not what's going on. What's happening is you need to know how to navigate your environment, how to take in nutrients, how to mate, how to survive, how to flee or fight, all these things. Happiness, not needed. And that's why we say that the Buddha sat down and began to swim upstream. It's not only a revolutionary thing to be still and to pay attention, but it's actually counter evolutionary in a way. It's a different kind of evolution that actually includes your happiness as mattering. Like your suffering actually matters from the Buddha's perspective. So this mutually conditioning and being conditioned by becoming attached to names and forms not realizing that they have no basis other than the activity of the mind itself. You take the show to be real, not realizing it's just a show, as an analogy. False imagination around pleasure and pain begins to arise, and the way to awakening is blocked. Again, from a purely materialistic and scientific point of view, you want to have a good, healthy nervous system that can detect pain, because that's dangerous to you as an organism. So this is painful, move away. It's not like this is evil or something. It just doesn't have your happiness in mind, as I keep asserting. Pleasure is hopefully there in ways that encourage you to do things that are good for your existence and the perpetuation of the species and so on. And yet, it's not sufficient. We're a little more complicated than just that. The sutra makes a kind of startling claim, says that the lower system of the sense minds, that's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and brain, and the discriminating mind, the mind of picking and choosing, the sense of ego, separate self, do not really suffer pleasure and pain. They only imagine they do. Distinction. It's not saying they don't encounter pleasure and pain. That's going to happen. The suffering of the encounter of pleasure and pain actually is a mirage. The brute fact of the perception and experience is brute fact. What it means to you, what you tell yourself about it, what seems to be an uncontrovertible fact about reality, is actually just more of the light show, says the Buddha. The sufferings of pleasure and pain are the deceptive reactions of the mortal mind. Now, this is a little unfortunate, okay? As this goes on, this translation happened in, I think, the 30s, if not the 40s, uses different terms. And as I've been saying, as we go along the study, there are many different terms, and they can become very confusing, even though they relate to the same thing. I think a particularly unhelpful translation, for some of us anyway, is this contrast between mortal mind and divine mind. And you'll see this as this goes on. I suppose someone trying to translate into English for the first time in a culture that's theistically drenched this might be a useful way to talk. I think for many today, it triggers all kinds of associations that are just really unhelpful. And so I'm going to translate them differently. The sutra itself makes many different terms for the same exact thing that it's pointing to. The Buddha says there are two ways in which the ceasing of the mind system may take place. Now, do not equate this with death or like going into a blackout or something. It's not talking about annihilation. It's talking about the cessation of grasping and clinging. Okay? When he says mortal mind, translate the mind of grasping, the mind of clinging, the mind of holding on. This is what it's meaning. There's two ways in which the ceasing of the mind system may take place, as regards form, as regards continuation. That this is very interesting. Watch what he does here. The sense organ functions as regards to form by the interaction of form, contact, and not mind, but now grasping. So up to now, it's been saying organ of perception, object of perception, mind of perception. And now it changes. It's organ, object, and clinging. And the reality is these are the same thing. These words are pointing to exactly the same thing. Form, contact, grasping. Does it make sense? So it continues in experience because of form, sense, and grasping, clinging. So this cessation of the sense minds that he's pointing to says it continues because of regards form and contact and grasping, and they cease to function when contact is broken. It's fairly self-evident. Regards continuation, this sort of karmic habit energy pattern, when these interactions of form, contact, and grasping or clinging cease, there is no more continuation of the seeing, hearing, or other sense functions. With the ceasing of these sense functions, the discriminations, graspings, and attachments of the discriminating mind cease. And with their ceasing, act and deed and their habit energy cease. There is no more accumulation of karma defilement on the face of universal mind. That's a lot, and it's very easy to misread that, to say that, you know, if I gouge my eyes out, then I'll be freed from the discrimination of sight or something. It's not saying that. It's saying something way cooler than that, actually. For that, tune in next week. Oh, attached to the answer, were you? Oh my goodness. How to survive, how to do. The sutra goes on very much to say, and I'll just kind of explain it, that it is possible, okay, to let go of that grasping, that clinging part. And what the sutra is really saying is that when you learn to let go and cease that automatic, unconscious conditioned clinging, then all the mind of suffering is not there. That clinging is the mind of suffering. And so what happens if you practice non-clinging? What happens if you practice not attaching? And this isn't so simple a thing as like, I'm not attached to my sweet guitar. This is far deeper than that. This is really like in your cells grasping, sense of self, and also the sweet guitar. But if you can learn to practice letting go, then what happens is that mortal mind, so translated unskillfully, I would say, the mind of clinging goes away, and what's left is, instead of, let's say, divine mind as the text uses, it also uses universal mind, or Buddha mind, or Tathagata Garbha, or true nature, or emptiness. All this slang is pointing to the same thing, which simply stated means this: if we can learn to let go, if we can train ourselves to not have the mind of clinging and relax that grip, and rather simply pay attention, then what rises naturally is true nature, true self, true, yes, divine mind. It's not a bad word, it works. True reality itself, it's right there. The whole thing hinges on this ability to recognize grasping as grasping, and to be able to sense in yourself when you are unwholesomely attached to something, and to know what to do with that and how to work with that. It's not saying that you want to somehow mute all your senses or something, and the great blankness of no perception is the truth. It's not what it's saying. And it's very easy to think that that would be what it's saying, particularly if you've never actually encountered a living expression of the lineage. If the evolving mortal mind were of the same structure as the universal mind, it uses the word nature, unhelpful word. If the mind of clinging is of the same organization or same structure as the nature of true reality, then the cessation of the lower mind of grasping would mean the cessation of true reality, and it does not. Again, a little tricky in the text because it uses the word same nature. And elsewhere, it's been said often that everything is of the same true nature. You have to a little bit clear of some of these things. But it's simply a different structure. It's of the same nature. But because they're structured differently or the experience of them is different, what this means is that the universal mind, this is the important point, Buddha mind, your true reality mind, cosmic mind, word, emptiness, sure, thusness, sure. The reality of thusness does not cause grasping mind directly. This is the important point. This is good because this means there's something that you can do about it. It means it's optional, which means you can opt the hell out. You can decide not. You can practice and actually free yourself from it. There is no cessation of the universal mind or its pure essential nature. There is no cessation of true reality, Buddha nature. It's that clinging bit that we have to kind of work on a little bit. It needs a little attention. Listen, it goes on. What ceases to function is not the universal mind or your true nature or Buddha nature or big mind, pick a word. What ceases to function is not true mind in its essence nature, but the cessation of the effect-producing defilements. Grasping. It's just a clunky way of saying grasping. The effect-producing defilement. It's grasping, it's clinging, and that has an effect. If you do that, then karma comes from that. So it's simply saying that the universal mind, true nature itself, is untainted, unmarred, pure and complete, lacking nothing. You've heard these words, I hope, right? And the cessation that's being talked about does not, what it's saying is the effect-producing defilements upon the face of reality that have been accumulated because of habit energy and discrimination and picking and choosing and the mind of me and mine and grasping. That's what ends. There is no cessation of divine mind. There is no ending of Buddha nature. There's no beginning to it either. Divine mind, which in itself is the abode of reality and the womb of truth, the Tathagata Garbha, your true self. So it's kind of interesting. The quest for the true self does not lie in any picking and choosing. It doesn't have to do with your taste in music or food or culture or any of the many identities that may be very real for you. But in essence, that's not who you really are. Those are expressions. But who are you? This is the essential point. By cessation of the sense minds is meant not the cessation of their perceiving functions, but the cessation of the discriminating and naming activities and grasping, which are centralized in the mind of grasping. So in other words, what the sutra is saying is that when that grasping part comes away, it's not like you suddenly turn into like a blacked out trance and there's no sense perception. There's still sense perception. Perhaps you've had a moment, fleeting or not, where you're at meditation or somewhere in the world, and suddenly the sense of yourself as a separate, distinct entity engaging with something fades. This can happen differently for different people depending on causes and conditions. But that experience of non-dual dharma, that experiencing for yourself the complete freedom, and that's, cultivated in the stillness of the meditation hall, practiced, it's developed, we train it. You become real good at it. You become good friends with it. See? Because what happens is when stillness is allowed its due and activity. But when stillness is allowed its due, then this clinging mind can relax. It's like death grip on the wheel. It doesn't want to. It feels like I can't let go. If I let go, we're all going to die. It's going to be horrible. But I want to let go because it's like it stings and it hurts. But I can't let go because it's me. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like a fever. It desperately wants to let go and it absolutely won't. But in these moments when the Zendo is just so, and time is being kept for you, and you're in a safe environment and everything's kosher, and you're able to settle down and actually trust the moment for a moment, that ever present sense of me raging against reality or harmonizing with it or whatever, you can relax. And you know, when that happens, you don't go into some like fog. You're there. Or better said, experience is happening. Sounds continue to be perceived. Sensations continue to arise. Thoughts still occur. And yet, this clinging mind is not there. What is it to perceive directly, intimately, without clinging or attachment? This doesn't mean you become, you have no opinion about anything, and you'll just to leave the Zendo today. You'll close your eyes, spin around until you're disoriented, and walk in a direction because you're free of picking and choosing. No, the exit's that way, son. But there's a way of living your life from that Buddha mind, from the mind of reality, expressing the truth of the cosmos in yourself, realizing fully that yourself and the self of the cosmos are not separate. And even that clinging mind itself is just another expression of it. By the cessation of the mind system as a whole is meant the cessation of picking and choosing, the clearing away of the various attachments, and therefore the clearing away of the defilements of habit energy on the face of universal mind. This is the way it's being expressed in the sutra. It's like the ocean. The depths of the ocean is your true self, and all the churn up top is kind of all that you see until things can settle down, and then you can see down into the depths. With the cessation of grasping mind, the entire world of delusion and desire disappears. Getting rid of the grasping mortal mind itself is nirvana. And then an important footnote. But, there's always a but. But the cessation of discrimination mind, of grasping mind, cannot take place until there has been a turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. This is where Zen starts to ring through here. This turning about in the deepest seat of your consciousness. The mental habit of looking outward and the grasping mind upon the external objective world as its sole and only way of existing must be given up. And a new habit of realizing the truth within the intuitive mind, within your Dharma eye mind, by becoming one with the truth itself must be established. And this is really ironic because you're already one with the truth itself. But realizing that fact, that takes a bit of mojo. Because that clinging mind is a strong habit energy pushing that thing. You know, it's like a big, big boat. And it's got momentum. And you see that iceberg and you turn. but the boat has its own momentum. It's not like a car. So awakening is kind of like this. You will have moments where you whether you recognize it or not, you already have, I'm sure everyone does. You have moments where that dualistic clinging mind has dropped off. But the question is, can you recognize it? Can you develop it and practice it? Do you even know enough to honor it? When an insight into the five dharmas, the three self natures, and the twofold egolessness is attained, then the way will be open for this turning about to take place. A distinction between insight and awakening is right here in the sutra. All that stuff is cognitive framework stuff. Necessary, not sufficient, but necessary. You have to actually think about this stuff a little bit. You have to pay attention to it. No amount of insight will stack up to the experience. And yet, the sutra is saying that when insight into the teachings of this sutra have taken place, landed, matched with practice over time, then the way is open for this turning about to take place. We call it awakening, kensho. We call it waking up. Waking up to what you've always been, what you've never been separate from, what you can't be separate from, what you are a perfect, complete expression of, and yet a little bit of white knuckling the wheel, a little bit of getting lost in the light show. That thoughts arise is simply a fact of you being alive, learning how to relate to them, that you live freely and fully for the benefit of yourself and others, for the true freedom of alleviating suffering for all beings throughout space and time. Well, that's a compelling project. I'd like to play that tune. How about you? You would take it up.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to breathe them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Thank you all for choosing to be here today. We will have a lasagna lunch following service. Are there any announcements?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Enmei. We had Dharma school today, and so we talked a bit about the nature of encouragement, and we talked about how Dharma training is a lot like marathon training. You cannot do it alone, but no one can do it for you. And we went out and we cheered on some of our runners today. And oh, sorry, did anybody want to come and show the signs that we made to do the encouragement? No, that's okay.
My name is Kensei. I want to let everybody know that May session registration closes on Monday, tomorrow, because May is a week-long session. And if you are a Shokan student or initiate or planning to apply for Shokan or hoping to, we're almost halfway through the training year. So I'm just bringing that to everybody's awareness. Um, that's all. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Okay. If not, please restore the Zendo.